I'm Michael Stevens, 44, and I need to tell you about the night my marriage ended in real time. 15 years ago, I met Victoria Harrison at a charity event. She was standing next to a piece of expensive art, like she owned the place. And honestly, her family kind of did. I was this 29-year-old guy managing investments, thinking I had it all figured out. Her dad, Robert, owned one of the biggest investment firms on the East Coast. When we got engaged, Robert pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. He needed someone who understood numbers because Victoria had taste, but taste doesn't build wealth. So that's what I did. I spent 14 years completely restructuring his entire operation, built trusts, created safeguards, turned a regional company into a national powerhouse. I did it all quietly because that's what you do when you marry into old money. I let Victoria collect art, sit on boards, and take credit for charity work I actually funded and organized. I told myself the recognition didn't matter, but it always matters. That Tuesday night changed everything. We were in our penthouse, overlooking the city. Victoria had just gotten back from some event, walking around barefoot with a wine glass like she was in a movie. I was working through trust documents at the counter. She made some comment about me still playing with spreadsheets. I reminded her those spreadsheets paid for everything, including that wine. She actually laughed at me, not with me. She said everything we had was hers. The wine, the view, the air I breathed. Her father built it all. Something went cold in my chest. I told her calmly that her father built the name, but I built the actual structure holding it together. That's when she said it. Go ahead and leave. She'd give me a week before I came crawling back when I realized I was nothing without her family. She actually believed I was just decorative, useful but replaceable. I took out my keys right there. Penthouse, car, elevator access. Set them on the counter one by one. She asked what I was doing and I said I was leaving like she asked. She told me to go ahead, that Jeff would change the locks in the morning anyway. I didn't say anything else, just grabbed my coat and left. I took the stairs down 42 floors because I needed time to think. By the time I hit the lobby, my phone was out. I sent 3 messages to 3 different lawyers with one word: execute. I got into a car I'd bought months earlier under a corporate name she didn't know existed and drove to my other office, the one where I'd spent 2 years preparing for exactly this moment. I sat at my desk and watched automated systems start rerouting access across 17 different accounts. Nothing illegal, just carefully dismantling everything I'd built. By 3 in the morning, Robert's emergency credit line was frozen. By 4, Victoria's gallery fund was flagged for review. By 5, the trust paying for the penthouse transferred control back to me. I leaned back and closed my eyes, knowing that across the city Victoria was sleeping peacefully, thinking she'd won. By morning, everyone would understand how wrong she was. The sun wasn't even up when Robert's phone started ringing. I know because I'd programmed those alerts to cascade in a specific order designed to maximize confusion. First, the credit facility, then operational accounts, then the trust protocols, each sending notifications to different departments and different people. I was sitting in my office with coffee watching the city wake up when my phone buzzed. Robert calling. I let it go to voicemail 3 times before finally answering on the 4th. He wanted to know what was happening. The bank had called about the backup credit line being frozen. Something about custodial authorization. I explained calmly that I'd withdrawn my guarantees the night before. The credit line was structured under my authorization as managing trustee, and without that, they couldn't process new draws. He tried to say, I couldn't just do this, but then he stopped because he knew I could. He'd signed those documents years ago when he needed someone he could trust with access. Then I heard Victoria in the background, confused about why the bank was calling so early. Robert told her I'd pulled my guarantees and she demanded to know what that even meant. He asked where I was and if we could meet. I said I didn't think so, reminded him that Victoria wanted space for a week, and suggested we see how that week went. Then I hung up. 30 seconds later, Victoria called. I answered out of curiosity. She immediately demanded to know what I'd done. I told her good morning pleasantly, which just made her angrier. She said her father claimed I froze accounts. I corrected her. I didn't freeze anything. I simply removed my authorizations from systems I'd built. Turns out when you tell the architect to leave, the building gets unstable. She called me insane. I told her I was precise. There's a difference. She said if I thought this would make her beg me to come back, and I interrupted to say I didn't want her to beg. I wanted her to understand that everything she thought was hers I'd built it. The trusts, the credit facilities, the investment protocols, all ran on systems I designed with my name as the failsafe, and I just pulled that failsafe. She insisted I couldn't do this, her voice rising with panic. I told her I already had, then wished her a good week and ended the call. I powered off my phone and looked out at Boston coming alive. Somewhere across the city in a penthouse that no longer recognized her access codes, my wife was realizing she'd made a terrible mistake. By noon, Victoria's world had collapsed into declined transactions and unanswered calls. Her assistant stopped responding, her stylist canceled. Even her car service said her account needed updating. That's when her best friend Jennifer showed up unannounced. Jennifer had been Victoria's college roommate, her maid of honor, the person she called after every event. They'd shared everything for 20 years, or so Victoria thought. Jennifer said she'd heard what happened, that I'd left and things were falling apart. Victoria demanded to know how she knew, and Jennifer said simply that I'd told her. The room went cold. Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed Victoria text messages between us, dozens of them going back months. She assured Victoria we weren't having an affair, explaining that I'd reached out 6 months ago because I was worried about what Victoria was becoming. Victoria stared at the messages, feeling betrayed that her best friend had been talking to me behind her back. Jennifer corrected her. She'd been watching Victoria destroy me for years. Every dinner where Victoria mocked my work, every event where she introduced me as just the finance guy, every time she rolled her eyes when I tried to explain what I actually did. 3 months ago, when Victoria mentioned thinking about divorcing me and taking everything, Jennifer told me. She told me Victoria was planning to blindside me with papers and a legal team Robert was assembling. Victoria felt the floor drop out from under her. She asked why Jennifer would do that, and Jennifer said it was because she'd watched Victoria become someone cruel, someone she didn't recognize anymore. I didn't deserve what Victoria was planning. Jennifer stood up to leave, mentioning that I'd called her after leaving to ask her to check on Victoria, to make sure she was safe. Even after everything, I was worried about her. That's the kind of man I was, and Victoria had thrown me away like I was nothing. Victoria told her to get out. Jennifer said she was going, but warned Victoria that when she went looking for support from friends, she'd discover how many of them actually respected me more than they ever liked her. Jennifer paused at the door and said, "We all knew I'd built everything. Victoria was just the only one who refused to see it." After Jennifer left, Victoria sat alone in the penthouse surrounded by art she'd curated and furniture she'd selected and a view she'd always thought of as hers. For the first time, she wondered how many other people had been watching her marriage from outside, seeing things she'd been too arrogant to notice. Her phone buzzed with a message from Robert telling her to come to the office immediately for damage control. Victoria arrived at her father's office to find Robert with 2 men she didn't recognize. One was elderly and sharp-eyed in an expensive suit, the other younger with a leather portfolio. Robert introduced them as Gerald Hutchins, their attorney, and Mark Sterling from Forensic Accounting. Victoria asked why they needed forensic accounting, and Robert told her to sit. Gerald opened a folder and explained they'd found concerning discrepancies in her personal accounts. Victoria asked, "What discrepancies?" And Mark leaned forward to explain that over 3 years, she'd accumulated about $2 million in personal debt across 17 credit cards and 3 loans. Victoria's stomach dropped. She said that was impossible. But Mark slid papers across the desks, showing designer purchases, private jet charters, exclusive memberships, all on personal cards, opened in her name, using the family's credit as collateral. Robert's voice was ice as he asked if she'd planned to tell him she'd been funding her lifestyle on credit. She'd thought the money would always be there, thought someone else was paying attention, thought I was handling it. Gerald said flatly that I wasn't paying those cards. I'd separated my finances from hers 2 years ago. I'd been covering my own expenses and contributing to household costs, but her personal spending was all her. The cards sent statements to an email she never checked, and interest was paid from an account she assumed was family money. It was her money from a trust I'd set up years ago, and that trust was now empty. Gerald pulled out another document about the Gallery Fund, the Harrison Family Arts Initiative. Victoria asked what about it, dreading the answer. He said it was technically insolvent, had been for 18 months, and I'd been covering shortfalls through personal capital to protect her reputation. Those payments stopped when I left. Robert stood and walked to the window, explaining that the gallery's board had met that morning and voted to remove her as director, pending financial review. The news would be public by tomorrow. Victoria felt tears building as Robert said this would destroy their reputation. The daughter of Robert Harrison removed from her own charity for financial mismanagement. She protested she didn't mismanage anything, and Robert finally raised his voice, asking what she did do. She spent money she didn't have, assumed someone else would clean up her mess, and mocked the one man holding everything together while she played curator. Gerald said they needed to find me and negotiate to contain this before it became catastrophic. Victoria said hollowly that I wouldn't reverse a decision once I made it. Robert looked at his daughter with what might have been disappointment and said they'd better figure out how to survive without me because right now they were drowning. I hadn't seen my daughter Emma in 2 days by design, Victoria's design. She'd been keeping Emma close, feeding her a version where I was the villain who abandoned them. But teenagers aren't stupid, and Emma was sharper than most. When she finally called Thursday afternoon asking to meet, just us, I immediately agreed. 30 minutes later, I walked into a bookstore on Newbury Street and found Emma in the back corner, same spot where we used to sit when she was younger. She looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes, still in her school uniform. I sat down and she immediately said her mom claimed I was trying to destroy them, that I'd frozen accounts and they'd lose everything, that she'd been crying for 2 days. I asked what Emma thought was happening. Her jaw tightened, and she said she thought we had a fight and I left. But she didn't understand why bank accounts mattered or why I couldn't just unfreeze them. I explained they weren't frozen. I'd removed my authorizations from accounts I built and managed. Victoria was realizing that much of what she thought was hers was actually structured under my name for legal and tax reasons. Emma asked if I did this on purpose, accusation in her voice. I said yes, simply. Her mother told me to leave and said I'd come crawling back in a week when I realized I was nothing without the Harrison name. So I left and took what was actually mine. The infrastructure, the authorizations, the systems keeping everything running. Emma said that was cold. I said it was honest, and I needed to tell her something hard to hear. Her mother had been planning to divorce me 6 months ago, working with attorneys to structure it so I'd leave with nothing while claiming I contributed nothing to the family wealth. Emma's eyes widened in shock. I told her Jennifer had come to me because she knew Victoria's plan wasn't right. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I started paying attention and documenting things. 3 months ago, I found emails between Victoria and a law firm. Emma looked like she might cry, but was fighting it, asking why I didn't tell her. I said she was 17 and shouldn't have to choose sides, but now that it was public, she deserved the truth. She asked if her grandfather knew, and I said he'd suspected, but Victoria didn't listen. After a quiet moment, Emma asked about Nathan. My chest tightened. Nathan was my 23-year-old son from before I met Victoria. I'd been honest about him from the beginning, but Victoria never accepted him, never allowed him in our home, never acknowledged him as family. Emma said Victoria claimed I'd probably chosen my other family over them now. I felt anger rising, but kept my voice level, explaining that Nathan was my son, her half-brother. I'd always wanted them to have a relationship, but Victoria wouldn't allow it. She made it clear that if I wanted to be part of Emma's life, Nathan couldn't be part of mine. So I saw him separately, quietly, because I refused to abandon either of my children. Tears finally spilled down Emma's cheeks. She said she had a brother I never told her about. I said I tried multiple times, but Victoria shut it down and I didn't want to put Emma in the middle. I was wrong and should have fought harder for them to know each other. Emma said suddenly that she wanted to meet him. I asked if she was sure, and she said yes. If he was her brother, she should know him. If her mom kept that from her, maybe she'd kept other things too. I texted Nathan asking if he was free for dinner because someone wanted to meet him. He responded immediately asking if I meant his sister. I confirmed and said Luigi's at 7. He said he'd be there, that he'd been waiting 17 years for this. I told Emma he was excited to meet her. She asked what he was like, and I said he was in grad school studying architecture, played guitar, and had her sense of humor. She'd like him. Emma nodded and then asked the question I'd been dreading. Were we getting divorced? I said yes. I was sorry, but yes. This wasn't fixable. She asked if it was because of money, and I said it was because her mother never saw me as a partner. She saw me as a tool, someone useful but not worth respecting. And I couldn't live like that anymore. Emma reached across the table and took my hand, saying she didn't think I was a villain. She thought I was tired of being invisible. I squeezed her hand, throat tight, thanking her for hearing me out. She asked if, when everything settled, would she still have both parents or was I going to disappear? I told her Victoria and I were done, but she was my daughter and that would never change, ever. She nodded with visible relief and said, "Okay, let's go meet her brother." Robert called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. I wasn't invited, but I knew what was happening because I still had access to the company's calendar systems. My codes hadn't been revoked because I'd built the security infrastructure with backdoor access as a safety measure. At 9, I received a text from an unknown number saying I needed to see this, with an attached live audio feed from the boardroom. Someone inside was streaming the meeting to me. I plugged in earbuds and listened. Robert thanked everyone for coming on short notice, saying they had a situation requiring immediate action. James Pemberton, a senior board member and Robert's former partner, cut him off saying they knew about the situation. I'd taken apart their operational infrastructure like I was defusing a bomb, and the question was what they were doing about it. Robert said they were negotiating. Another voice demanded to know what they were negotiating when I held all the cards, every trust, every account structure, every tax shield. They'd given me that power. James shot back that Robert gave me power because I was competent, more competent than anyone in that room, including Robert. And now they were paying the price for treating me like hired help instead of the partner I actually was. Patricia Simmons, the financial auditor, said she'd reviewed the structure, and it was brilliant, legally airtight. Every authorization, transfer protocol, and failsafe required my personal approval with no override. I designed it specifically to prevent exactly what Victoria was trying to do now, wrestle control from the person who built it. Robert asked slowly if they had no leverage. Patricia said not exactly. They had one piece of leverage, my reputation. I was a professional, and if they approached this professionally with fair terms, I might negotiate a transition. Someone asked, what if I wasn't willing? And Patricia's voice was grim, saying Harrison Capital Management would collapse within 90 days, maybe sooner. The room erupted in overlapping voices of panic and anger. I listened to them scramble. These people who'd smiled at me across conference tables while treating me like background staff. Then Robert's voice cut through, saying there was another option. Remove Victoria from all operational roles, make it clear to me she no longer had authority over business decisions, and offer me sole operational control independent of the marriage. James sounded shocked, asking if Robert would cut out his own daughter. Robert said his daughter just cost them $200 million in frozen assets and threatened collapse of a firm his grandfather built. So yes, he'd cut her out if it meant survival. Patricia called for a vote on offering me full operational control as an independent contractor separate from family authority. One by one, voices called out in favor, and when the count finished, it was unanimous. Robert cleared his throat, saying someone needed to reach out to me officially. James said he'd do it, that I'd listen to him because we'd always had mutual respect. Robert added to make it clear this wasn't charity, but recognition of a position they should have given me years ago. The meeting adjourned, and I sat in my office staring at nothing. My phone rang with James calling. I answered saying hello, and he said he assumed I'd been listening. No point lying, so I confirmed. He said, then I knew what they were offering. Full operational control, board seat, equity position, compensation reflecting my actual value. With my marriage to Victoria becoming irrelevant to my company role. I asked what about Victoria, and he said she was being removed from all decision-making with the board unanimous. Her father had proposed it. James explained Robert knew he'd made a mistake choosing loyalty to blood over loyalty to competence, and it nearly destroyed everything. He wasn't making that mistake twice. I said I'd think about it, and James warned not to think too long because we had 72 hours before credit agencies started downgrading us. He hung up and I sat holding the phone, feeling the weight of a decision that would define everything. 3 days after the board meeting, I received a package at my office with no return address, just my name typed on the label. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note saying I deserved to know the truth, signed by a friend. I plugged the drive into my laptop and found a professionally formatted PDF dated over 6 months titled Financial and Personal Activity Report for Victoria Harrison Stevens. Someone had hired a private investigator to follow my wife. I scrolled through pages of photographs, bank statements, credit card receipts, and text messages. My stomach turned as the picture became clear. Victoria hadn't just been spending recklessly. She'd been living a completely separate life I knew nothing about. Photos showed her at restaurants I'd never been to with people I'd never met. Expensive lunches on cards I didn't know existed. Hotel rooms booked under her maiden name. Then there were text messages extracted from phone records. Conversations with someone named M that made my blood cold. She told this person I suspected nothing, that I was too busy with spreadsheets to notice anything. They asked when she was leaving me, and she said soon, after the fiscal year closed for better asset division positioning. I leaned back, hands shaking slightly. The betrayal wasn't surprising anymore, but seeing it documented and time-stamped hit differently. I kept reading as the investigator identified M as Marcus Webb, a gallery owner from New York with divorced family money, exactly Victoria's type. They'd been seeing each other 8 months, meeting at art shows and spending weekends at his Hamptons place, while I thought she was at conferences. The report concluded with financial analysis showing Victoria had spent approximately $340,000 on this relationship, through hotels, gifts, and travel, all funded by credit cards opened using family credit as leverage. My phone rang with James calling, asking without preamble if I'd received a package. I asked if he sent it. He said he'd hired the investigator 3 months ago, after a board meeting where I'd saved them from a disastrous merger deal. He started paying attention to how Victoria treated me, the dismissiveness and mockery, and it bothered him. He wanted to know if his instincts were right, and they were. I asked what he wanted me to do with this. He said that was up to me, but if I negotiated with the board and came back to Harrison Capital, I needed absolute strength. That report gave me leverage since Victoria was planning to paint me as a gold digger while she'd been exploiting family resources. I said this would destroy her reputation, and James replied, she was willing to destroy mine. He wasn't telling me to use it, just to have it in case she got ugly. After he hung up, I sat alone with the evidence. Part of me wanted to send it to Robert, to show him exactly who his daughter was. But another part that still remembered loving her, once hesitated. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, asking if she could stay with me that week, because she couldn't be around her mom, who wouldn't stop crying and blaming everyone but herself. I typed back, of course. I'd set up the guest room. She asked if Nathan could come for dinner tomorrow, because he was funny and she liked having a brother. I smiled despite everything and said absolutely. I looked back at the report on my screen, then closed the laptop. Whatever Victoria had done or planned, I had my daughter now. I had my son. I had the board's respect and a future that didn't depend on her family's name. The truth was documented and secured, ready if I needed it. But right now I had a guest room to prepare. Victoria showed up at my office, unannounced Thursday afternoon. My assistant tried to stop her, but she pushed past, bursting through my door like a storm demanding we talk. I looked up from my computer, saying she should have called first. She said she tried, but I'd blocked her number. I said I blocked her personal number, and her attorney had my attorney's information. That's how we communicated now. She closed the door and leaned against it looking thinner, makeup not quite covering exhaustion. She asked if we could just talk like human beings for 5 minutes. I gestured to the chair across from my desk and said 5 minutes. She sat clutching her purse like a lifeline, saying she knew I was angry and she'd said things she shouldn't have. But what I was doing was destroying everything. I said calmly I wasn't doing anything. Just remove my authorizations from systems I built. She said that wasn't all, and I knew it. Her father's company was hemorrhaging money. The board was in chaos. Her reputation was ruined. I said her reputation was ruined because she spent $2 million she didn't have and got removed from the gallery board for financial mismanagement. I didn't do that. She did. Her face flushed as she said she made mistakes, but we could fix this, go to counseling, and work through issues. I interrupted saying I knew about Marcus. She froze. I said I knew about the hotels, the Hamptons trips, the $340,000 she spent on him over 8 months. I had bank statements, photos, text messages, all of it. Color drained from her face as she asked how I got that. I said it didn't matter how. What mattered was she was planning to divorce me, take everything, and paint me as contributing nothing, while she funded an affair with family money and prepared to walk away like the sufferer. Her hands trembled, asking if I was going to blackmail her. I stood and said no, I was giving her a choice. She could accept a fair divorce settlement, splitting assets appropriately, agree to shared custody of Emma with no restrictions on my relationship with Nathan, and walk away quietly. Or she could fight me and drag this through courts and I'd make sure every detail of her affair became public record. She whispered, "I wouldn't do that." I said flatly to try me. I built everything she thought was hers, protected and provided for her. Loved her for 14 years while she mocked, dismissed, and planned to destroy me. So, yes, I absolutely would if she forced my hand. Tears streamed down her face as she said she didn't mean for things to go this far, that she felt trapped like she was living in a life someone else designed. I corrected her, saying she was living in a life I designed because she never bothered learning how any of it worked. She just enjoyed the benefits and resented the person providing them. She asked desperately, "What about Emma?" I said Emma was staying with me this week by her own choice, and before Victoria accused me of turning her against her, Emma figured it out herself. She was 17, not stupid. Victoria sank back into the chair defeated, saying she'd lost everything: her daughter, reputation, marriage. I said softer now that she didn't lose those things. She threw them away thinking she could get something better. But there isn't anything better, just different and usually worse. She wiped her eyes with mascara smearing, asking what happens now. I said now she talks to her attorney, accepts the settlement terms Catherine is drafting, co-parents Emma with dignity and respect, and rebuilds her life without me in it. She asked what if she didn't, and I said then we go to war, and I promised she'd lose. Despite everything, I didn't want to humiliate her publicly, but I would protect myself and my children, and that was non-negotiable. Victoria stood slowly gathering her purse. At the door, she paused, saying she was sorry. For what it's worth, she really was. I said I believed her, but sorry didn't undo the damage. It just meant she finally understood what she did. She left without another word. I watched through my window as she walked to her car, looking smaller somehow. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert asking if we could meet, that he wanted to make me an offer I couldn't refuse. I smiled slightly and typed back tomorrow morning 9 at his office. The war was ending, and now came rebuilding. The mediation took place in a neutral conference room with lawyers on both sides and a professional mediator named Dr. Ellen Cortez presiding. Victoria sat across from me with her attorney Roger. Both looking prepared for battle, Dr. Cortez said, "Let's begin," and asked my attorney Catherine to summarize my settlement terms. Catherine explained I proposed a clean division. Victoria receives her trust fund intact at approximately $8 million plus. The art collection she curated valued at $2 million, while I retain my equity stake in Harrison Capital, personal accounts, and separate business holdings. Roger interrupted, saying that was completely unacceptable, since Victoria contributed 14 years to the marriage. Catherine cut him off, saying Victoria contributed 14 years of spending, and we had documentation showing $2 million in personal debt plus $340,000 spent on an extramarital affair, while my client subsidized her lifestyle as she actively planned to divorce him and take everything. Victoria's face went white as Roger leaned over, whispering urgently to her. Catherine continued that we proposed joint custody of Emma with no restrictions on my relationship with my son Nathan, since Victoria had attempted to exclude Nathan from family gatherings for years, and that ended now. I added that Emma should decide where she wanted to live, not us, since she was 17 and smart enough to make that choice herself. Dr. Cortez asked Victoria if she wished to respond. Her voice was barely above a whisper, asking about the penthouse. I said the penthouse was owned by a trust I managed, and she could remain 6 months while finding alternative housing, after which it would be sold or reassigned. She asked 6 months in panic, and I said calmly that was generous considering she told me to leave with nothing. Roger cleared his throat, saying his client wanted to discuss affair allegations privately. I said firmly, no, everything gets discussed here on record or goes to court and becomes public anyway, her choice. Victoria closed her eyes and asked how I found out about Marcus. I said someone who cared enough to show me the truth, unlike people she thought were friends. She asked if her father knew, and I said not yet, but he would if this didn't settle today. She looked at Roger, then back at me, asking what I wanted from her. I said I wanted her to accept responsibility, sign the papers, let Emma make her own choices, and let me move forward without her trying to destroy me out of spite. If she did that and settled fairly, what she did stayed between us. I wasn't interested in revenge, just wanted out. She sat there a long moment, then nodded slowly, saying, okay, she'd sign. Roger started protesting, but she held up her hand, saying no. I was right, she made this mess and would accept consequences. 2 hours later, the papers were signed, and Victoria left without looking at me. Catherine packed up satisfied, saying that went better than expected, I replied she knew she was knocking, and somewhere under all that entitlement knew she deserved it. I walked out into the Boston evening feeling lighter somehow. 14 years had ended with signatures on paper, no drama or theatrics, just the quiet ending of something dying for years. My phone buzzed with Emma, asking if it was done. I said it was. She said good, that she and Nathan were making dinner at my place, and to get there soon. I smiled and headed home. 8 months later, I stood in the executive boardroom of Harrison Capital Management as the newly appointed Chief Operating Officer. Robert sat at the head of the table, but real power had shifted and everyone knew it. Robert announced our third quarter numbers exceeded projections by 18%, and restructuring under my leadership positioned us for the strongest fiscal year in company history. Applause went around the table. I nodded acknowledgement but didn't smile because this wasn't about validation. It was about building something sustainable. After the meeting, James pulled me aside, saying someone was here to see me. I walked to my new corner office with twice the space and found a woman I didn't recognize at first, mid-30s in a professional suit with a warm smile. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a financial analyst recently moved to Boston, hoping we could discuss the philanthropic fund I'd established for children's hospitals. I'd set up the fund 6 months ago, quietly using my own money. I'd been donating anonymously through Harrison Capital for years, but now wanted it formalized, transparent, and real. She said she'd like to contribute and help expand it, that she'd reviewed my structure and it was brilliant. Most people talk about giving back, but I'd actually designed a system that works. We talked for an hour and she was sharp, funny, and unpretentious. When she left, she handed me her card saying if I ever wanted to grab coffee and talk about something other than money, she'd like that. I looked at the card, then at her, and said I'd like that too. That evening, I had dinner with Emma and Nathan at my apartment, the one I'd purchased in my own name, and decorated simply with no marble or pretension, just space that felt like mine. Emma announced proudly that Nathan got accepted to MIT's architecture program. I said that was incredible, and congratulations. Nathan said thanks, and he wanted me to know he was putting Stevens on all his applications now, not hiding it anymore. My throat tightened as I said he never had to hide it. He said he knew but wanted to before, and now he wanted people to know whose son he was. Emma raised her glass of soda in a toast to family, the real kind. We clinked glasses, and later after they left, I stood on my balcony overlooking the Charles River. Somewhere in this city, Victoria was rebuilding her life. I'd heard she moved to New York closer to Marcus, trying to start over. I hoped she found whatever she was looking for. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Sarah Mitchell asking about coffee on Saturday, saying there's a place in Cambridge she thought I'd like. I typed back that Saturday worked and I was looking forward to it. I looked out at lights reflecting off the water and thought about everything that led to this moment. The mockery, the dismissal, the moment I laid those keys on the counter and walked away from everything I thought was permanent. Turned out nothing was permanent except things you built yourself. The foundation held, and on it I was building something new, something real, something mine.